Ori and the Will of the Wisps is a masterpiece with flaws, a sequel worthy of the name to its prequel, the timeless gem Ori and the Blind Forest. Now with that said, I could make a long-form critique of Ori's sequel, but this video isn't going to be that. Instead I wanted to talk specifically about what most likely got every fan talking, which is the beautiful, tragic, and provocative ending to Ori and the Will of the Wisps. This video won't talk about the gameplay, the boss fights, map design, and all of the other attributes of this game. I may make a later video about that, but this will be talking about the stories of both games and will contain spoilers. So before I go forward, I have a condition. If you haven't played Ori and the Blind Forest, stop. Stop right now. I forbid you from proceeding any further with this video. You need to go back and play that. First, experience the game, its world, its story, and all its glory. Denying yourself that pleasure is a cardinal sin that I refuse to contribute to. It came out in 2015, it's a 20-hour game, and it's pretty damn cheap, despite being better than most AAA games out there. So go do that shit and come back after you play Ori and the Will of the Wisps, as you no doubt will after finishing Blind Forest. Right, so now that we got that straight, let's begin. So after the epic final boss battle with the cursed owl known as Shriek, a creature who has never known warmth in her life, and has been rejected from any companionship or belonging that she sought since she was born. After her parents died before her birth, and when she was born, she didn't come out like a traditional owl would, she was mutated into something hideous, for lack of a better term. She's got like these bone chips protruding from her like limbs, and demon horns on her forehead. Her home is the Silent Woods, a place of decay, desolation, death, and ruin. It's dry, dark, and silent because there's no life there anymore. Now what's unclear is how long it's been that way, and what caused the life there to die. We could assume it was something recent to her birth, obviously. Her parents died watching over her as they turned to stone or solid ash, and the remains are clearly preserved where they stood in their last moments. I'm pretty sure it's implied that it was because of the shattering of the light and the death of the Nylon Willow tree, the one that later pleads Ori to take its place and embrace the light that was shattered, but we'll get to that. The lack of light is what caused the decay, according to Quolok, and he says that if Ori doesn't find the wisps, the light will fade forever. The Silent Woods being the end result, a lifeless dark hollow with Shriek being the last of its offspring. Though that does make the timeline a little murky, because I'm pretty sure one of the little creatures says that it's been like 100 years or something since the wheels turned from the wellspring, the watermill which had stalled due to the decay the land of Nylon fell into. So how old would that make Shriek? One would think pretty old, not sure. And owls typically do not have a very long lifespan by human standards. Perhaps Shriek was born towards the end of the calamity? That would explain why the Silent Woods were the first to be lost and why she was the last owl offspring to come out of there. But yes, this creature has only known loneliness and misery her whole life, cast out into the wild without any parents to tame her from adopting a violent nature, ridiculed and rejected for her mutated appearance, something she was born with and could not help. She was born in the darkness and lived in the darkness for so long that she didn't embrace the light when it was offered to her by Ori. Shriek didn't know what friendship was, she didn't understand it. Ori offering friendship and warmth to her was the equivalent of describing sight to the blind. And so she treats Ori's offer as another ploy to hurt her, and she turns away. When Ori finally reaches the Dying Willow and is told his destiny is to save the land of Nylon by merging with Seer, the light of the forest, he is willing to do so, but he doesn't have the time to fully consider the consequences of this. Because before Ori is allowed to do this, Shriek opts to prevent this from happening. The cursed creature from the darkness, turned evil by the world, living a miserable existence, steals the light and crushes it, and casts it down into the darkness where she feels it belongs, before turning towards Ori to ensure the light does not return and Nylon is condemned to the same fate that she was subjected to. Shriek's motivation for doing this falls under the common misery loves company rule of life. But now the stage has been set for the final confrontation. Ori, the embodiment of life and prophesied spirit from a distant land to save the forest, and Shriek, the embodiment of darkness and hatred who wants to plunge the land into shadow. The battle itself is climactic and powerful. It feels epic, like it's deciding the fate of the world. And the battle itself drives home that sense of finality, until Ori delivers the final blow. I find this is an interesting dynamic between the characters. Ori was born in the light and Shriek was born in the darkness. The ending to Shriek's journey is she opts to stay and die in the darkness. At the one spot she feels even a sliver of warmth and belonging, the bones of her long dead parents, and she never even knew them, but who we assume are the only two creatures she feels content being with, even if they lay dead. And so Shriek resigns herself to die in the Silent Woods alone to be with her family and escape the cold reality of the world she's come to know. This is just downright tragic and heartbreaking. Shriek's story shows how no creature is truly ever born evil. It's a case of nature versus nurture, or rather in this case, a lack of nurture. Without guidance, love, and warmth, a child born in our world could likely find themselves living a fate like Shriek's, or possibly worse. But now we come to the end of the story, and Ori's fate. The ending very much mirrors the beginning of Blind Forest, Ori exhausted, clawing his way forward, the memories he has of his loved ones shortly before tragedy strikes. The dying willow told Ori that he would have to leave one life behind to save the forest, and we can see from the sorrowful look on Ori's face that this is something he dearly does not want to do. But if he doesn't, then Ku, his best friend, will remain lost. Quolok's sacrifice would have been for nothing, the rest of the Moki will wither and fade, and the forest itself will be lost. Ori's memories reflect the journey he's been on, throughout Will of the Wisps, until he finally reaches Seer. Ori pulls out Kuro's feather, his last and possibly his most treasured possession, the last reminder of his journey from Blind Forest, and slowly but surely he does let it go. It flies away with the wind, symbolic of Ori letting go of himself, of his loved ones, and the life he has built for himself with his family, so he can embrace his destiny in order to save those very loved ones. Gareth Coker's music shines on point here, and Seer tells Ori it is time. Ori embraces the light, vanishing with its glow. Nywin is then overcome with Seer's light, and Ku awakens with its health and its wing fully restored. Ku's wing was also a birth defect, mind you, not an injury. Naru, Gumo, Ku, and the Moki all rejoice that the light has returned to the forest. They track down the spot where Ori was last seen. It's surrounded by decay, but we see one healthy patch of grass. Ori's family despairs, thinking that their friend is gone. We hear a faint cry in Ori's voice as a tiny sprout with a light bulb, no pun intended, emerges from the patch of green grass. And then comes the twist. The voice of the spirit tree that has been accompanying us this whole time was indeed Ori. And this was quite the surprise reveal, one that made my heart flicker indeed. This was extremely thought-provoking. So much so that on my first playthrough it wasn't as emotionally hard-hitting as it might have been for some people, because I was too busy thinking about the long-term implications of this revelation rather than what was actually happening right in front of me. Which is why my second playthrough was actually more hard-hitting for me emotionally, because I had time to process it. Now what we can take from this is that Ori was the narrator's voice from the start of the game itself. If you look back to the beginning and if you read the words closely, there's a subtle tip-off because the voice of what we assumed was the spirit tree of Nibel was speaking in first person. However, if you go back and play Blind Forest, you can see the spirit tree of Nibel references Ori as a separate being. My first thoughts on this was that Ori had been the voice since the beginning of the first game, so unless this is a retcon, Ori was only the voice since Will of the Wisps. Now I assumed the voice sounded similar because Spirit Willows just sound the same as each other, Ori being the new Spirit Willow of Nywin, having a similar voice as the Spirit Willow in Nibel. However, remember the dying Willow's voice from Nywin as Ori approaches it was somewhat different. Perhaps it's because the Willow itself was much older and frailer, and so with it was its voice. So I do hope Moon Studios only intended the twist to pertain to Will of the Wisps and not to Blind Forest, otherwise it wouldn't make much sense. And Ori being the child of the Nibel Spirit Tree, being the vessel for the new Spirit Willow to grow, is very poetic and beautiful. Once Ori's family finds the spot where he now lays, they remain with him. They bring him water so he can grow, bask in his light. And despite Ori departing from the physical realm, we see that his family remained with him as the countless years and the passage of time progresses. We see Ku grow from an owlet to a fully grown creature of the sky. We see Gumo's eyes change, indicating its age perhaps, as well as what appears to be a mild limp. Gumo helps a struggling and weary Naru up to the tree to watch the forest in the light of the child she once cared for as she slowly passes away and fades. The camera then pans up and we see the fully grown Spirit Willow of Nywin, the light of Seer flourishing through Ori as the forest has grown lush and beautiful. And another callback to Blind Forest is with the closing shot you can see the carvings of Ori's family in their homestead, but this time the homestead surrounds Ori, and the carvings of Gumo, Naru and Ku are embedded into Ori himself, into the willow. And Ori's voice recites, "It was the will of the Wisps that life began anew." And so Ori and the Will of the Wisps ends as the first story began, with a spirit leaf breaking off from the willow and off into the breeze. And thus we have the end. Now there's a lot to discuss here, but in short, people have said that this is a huge sequel tease, when I'm not so sure. The story feels close-ended, but with the tiniest hints of a sequel tease, like in the first game, but unlike the first game, Ori is gone. Ori's loved ones are gone from time itself. That spirit that emerged from Ori's tree will be a spirit like Ori. There have been many spirits like Ori, but the spirit itself won't be Ori. Unless the game tells us that the spirit is like an Ori reincarnation, but I doubt it. So yes, the ending does feel close-ended. My research hasn't revealed any comment on this being the last Ori game, but feel free to correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. But also, back in December, Moon Studio said that they were working on an IP, a brand new IP, an action RPG of sorts, which is wonderful news. I can't wait to see what they have planned, but it doesn't lend much hope for another Ori game when you couple that with the game's ending. As for the ending itself, it's a beautiful, bittersweet, and poetic end to a fantastic game, and a fantastic set of games. But as a huge fan of both games, I kinda wish we got more. And I suppose that's a good thing, feeling fulfilled but wanting more from a story, a universe, its characters, etc. But that's the thing, as great as the ending is, I can't help feeling like it wrapped up too quickly. I would have loved to explore Ku some more, and Gumo, and Naru, and the other forest creatures from the Glade a bit more. The ending to Ori and the Will of the Wisps feels like the closing chapter to a trilogy, but instead it only has 2 parts. I'm just kind of baffled they did such a great job expanding the lore and introducing so many more adorable characters, only to wrap things up in such a neat little bow so quickly. I hope for another Ori at some point, but I just don't see how that will work. And again, I'm not knocking the game for this, but I enjoyed the ride so much that I just can't help feeling that we could have gotten so much more from the Ori world. As for the better ending, I gotta say, Blind Forest takes the cake. What can I say? The ending is simple, effective, tear-jerking, tragic, heartwarming, and just flat out perfect. I'm a sucker for it, I'm sorry. Will of the Wisps ending, on the other hand, is bittersweet, tragic, heartwarming, tear-jerking, but more challenging in terms of provoking thought from the player, if that makes sense. When the twist was revealed, I contemplated the meaning of life, the justification of sacrifice, and what it would feel like to transcend the physical realm and leave your loved ones behind, but still, in a way, be with them, if that makes sense. Not to mention, there's a through line with the game of embracing the light. Ori was born in the light and embraces the light, while Shriek was born in the darkness and opts to stay in darkness. But Shriek had the choice of embracing the light, but chose not to. Whilst Ori's choice was mainly governed by destiny. He didn't want to embrace the light more so than he had to. Shriek wanted the light, but spent so much time in the darkness after too long that she didn't even recognize it anymore. Like I said, a very thought-provoking, very deep, and very sad, but also uplifting ending at the same time. This game was beautiful. I loved it, and I hope we get another one. Thank you Moon Studios for giving us this masterpiece, and thank you Gareth Coker for another god-tier soundtrack. That brings us to the end of the video. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. Consider sticking around if you enjoyed this. You can check out some of my other videos, and you can also check out my main channel as well. I want to give a shout out and thank you to all of my patrons. You guys are awesome. I appreciate your support. And if you'd like to support the channel and my work with a monthly donation, even if it's just $1 per month, the link for Patreon is in the description below. There's also the channel merchandise store for the main channel if you're looking to pick up some cool new threads and support the channel. And I've recently opened a Discord server for this channel as well, which is separate from my main Discord that exclusively talks about gaming. So check it out, you may make some friends along the way. I also have a Twitter and you can find me there as well. One last thank you for staying to the end of the video, you are a legend, and here's to another good sesh.